Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Behavioral View Hot Topics today. And we brought the whole team because today's topic is fun and meaningful and something that a lot of us are very passionate about. So I'm Shannon Hill. I'm the editor-in-chief at CentralReach Institute, and I will let you guys just introduce yourselves, and I'll call on you so that you can do that, and we won't talk all over each other. How's that? So, Carrie, you're next on my screen. Say hi.
Hi, I'm Carrie Millico. I'm the Director of Clinical Programming at CentralReach.
And Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen Smith. I'm a Senior Instructional Designer at CentralReach.
And Kelly?
Hey y'all, I'm Kelly King. I am a content developer here at CentralReach.
Nissa?
Hi everyone, I'm Nissa and I'm the Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
And Tim?
Hello, Tim Fuller, Instructional Designer here at CentralReach.
Yeah, so this is just a few of the behavior analysts that we have on our teams at CentralReach. And one of the things that we decided that we would bring to the forefront on Hot Topics is true or false, pro or con, self-determination and assent. Do they align with the philosophy of behavior analysis? Who wants that hot potato first?
Tim does.
I'm waiting for it.
No, I don't know if I want the ball first. I guess the only inquiry that I would start off with is it sort of, do we want to take the easy way or do we want to take the more nuanced way? And I think sometimes with hot button issues that have a lot of weight, certainly social weight and weight as they are related to the application of our science, it can be a little tricky. As an admirer of our philosophical tradition and our science more generally, I think that this is a great space to invest time and to invest scrutiny and rigor. And I would only ask that maybe we start with what we mean by self-determinism or determinism more generally, and that might help qualify where a topic like assent fits in our, more often, the application of our science. So the ABA, but that's not to say that it's only relevant there. It's relevant in lots of activities that we do.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by determinism?
Yeah, I like that you launched there, actually, because I agree that sometimes in behavior analysis, we have one language and the rest of the world has another. And I'm not sure that the self-determination movement is rooted in as strong a philosophical background as what we have come up through to come up with our thoughts on that. Coming from the ID world where self-determination ideas have been formulated for a much longer period of time, I think they are just saying that if choices are to be made about my life, I will make them, not you. And if we want to bring that into our terminology, maybe we could say my learning history will make that determination, not your learning history.
Yeah.
I didn't mean that to be the end of the show. So
We're good. Well, I have a comment or a thought. My thought is, if we were talking about the application of our science in any other context than with developmentally disabled individuals, would this even be a discussion we're having? Right? Like if we're looking at going in from like an OBM standpoint and structuring a business, would we talk about employees assenting or their self-determination or making decisions for them? And I think like that's really far on one end of the sphere to like throw that out there. But I think it's an important point that sometimes by not thinking about this more globally as applied to like the human race, I think it like undermines our science a little bit, right? And everybody here knows I'm like such a proponent of assent and self-determination, but that's like my first thought, right?
I like how you took it there, Kristen, because when we got an idea of what this topic was today, I thought about health and fitness and how health and fitness coach really does need to bring in assent at some capacity. The coach isn't going to come in and say, I'm going to tell you what you're going to work on. It's what would you like to work on together? What are your goals? Here's how I can help you achieve those goals. So if we take it out of the context of the clients that we work with, we wouldn't really have to have this conversation, because you do need whoever it is that you're supporting in treatment, in education, you need them to agree that we're working on the same goals together and you're here to support. I love that view of it.
To add to that, Nessa, I really like your example. Like, I have 80-year-old feet. I will be 42 in November and my feet are 80. And as such, like, I want my butt to look like it did when I was 20, and there are certain exercises for that, but yet I can't do all of that. Right. And no one looking at me knows that. They don't know that like the range of motion for my big toes like doesn't exist. Right. Or that like my foot like is like concave and convex or something like that. Right. It puffs out when there's a cramp. Right. Like, so these are things that nobody knows, but I need to advocate. So, okay. Yeah. Thank you for bringing in my goals. Even more so, I can't do alternating lunges. That's just not a thing for me. And I'm going to withdraw my assent every time that shows up on the queue for exercises. I think that, these constructs, the titles are more like concepts, right? So assent, self-determination, just like executive functioning or health or being healthy, can all just be unpacked behaviorally. I think it's like, then how do we then apply our behavior analytic concepts and philosophy to what we can break that down? I may have looked a little distracted at the start of this because I was trying to find this resource. And that I used to teach some of these self-determination skills, and we broke it down based on problem solving, which has rich literature and behavior analysis, goal setting and attainment, again, rich literature and behavior analysis. Self-awareness is just being to identify and list someone's own strengths and abilities. Self-advocacy, again, which is a priority in behavior analysis. So I think it's more about is it so much just the term that everyone just creeps away from because this construct. It's okay, well then how do we break it down behaviorally and show these behaviors within this overarching group? That is just a label that is really easy for us to use in short-term language instead of having me go in and list 7 other behaviors that are a subset of this overarching label.
Yeah, that's one of my first notes was words. We're playing word games.
But Shannon, that's what we do. As you know, that we peddle in language, and I think our words matter. And I think that the way that we organize our words and we scrutinize the way that we employ them and we apply rigor is really important. And so if I'm going to, I couldn't agree more with what's been said so far. Where I would maybe throw in, which I don't think I'll find much disagreement among these colleagues, is that, I think that what I would caution against is sort of the convenience using of some of these terms, especially inside of less rigorous formats, and making it sound like that is our position or disposition. Said more clearly, I think that we can do more harm than good when we just feel the need to say something on social media and apply our expertise as if to suggest that that is a definitive statement from our discipline. And I think that science doesn't work well in the sphere of a social media environment. That's not a really great place to bring the kind of rigor that we need, the kind of nuance that we need, the type of care and compassion that is helpful. That's not to suggest that it doesn't serve a role. It just might not be a role that I particularly enjoy participating in or find much value in, but that's not to suggest that it doesn't have a value. And I think that that's kind of maybe what we're getting at. There's a hot topic here. As Ascent has a lot of momentum behind him, a lot of gravity behind it. And if that doesn't have something to do with what we do as a science or the application of that science, then we're in big trouble, because Ascent seems a whole lot like behavior, as Carrie kind of brings out, breaking it down. And if we're struggling to find Ascent, it means that we're struggling to broaden or support the broadening of a repertoire for someone to actually have many alternatives to choose from. Someone's repertoire is so narrow that there are not a lot of choice-like behaviors to record and look at the distribution of behavior across a variety of alternatives. That's what our science has been doing that for as long as we've been doing the experimental side of our science. Our philosophy certainly supports that. And our practice, I think, is refining in ways that is more sensitive to how to incorporate these things in meaningful ways that bring dignity to those that we work with and serve, regardless of the reason for them getting services. I mean, whether or not, as Kristen brings up, inside of an organizational situation, whether it's working with a kid, an adult, an adolescent, a parent. I think that that's the meat that we're trying to get. We're having a little bit of fun with Ascent, kind of talking around. I like that. But
Well, and Tim, I always feel like Cass and I, we present on Ascent a lot. And I guarantee every single time there's someone who asks us, like, well, aren't you just reinforcing escape maintain behavior? But like, that's not withdrawing Ascent, that's just escape behavior. I'm like, well, they're one and the same. And Ascent, there's lots of levels of it, right? It's like assenting to the session, assenting to this error correction procedure, assenting to the environment, assenting to the person who's sitting close to me. And, like Shannon, back to what you said at the beginning, I think starting to honor the withdrawal of Ascent and then teach Ascent giving and revoking behaviors as like an operant class of behaviors is what establishes that foundational level of self-determination. So like within that, I'm learning, here are my values, here's what's okay, here's what's not okay. Like these are things I started teaching my daughters and now my son at like a very early age, right? Like people can't touch you when this is where they can touch you, this is where they can't, this is where you can say no, this is when you can explode in a no. And I think that like by teaching them that's where we're moving them toward that concept of self-determination, right? And like empowerment in being able to stand up for themselves and say like, this is what's okay for me. And it may not be what's okay for you. And that in and of itself is actually okay,
And Kristen, you just identified something that was beautiful, though, is like you brought in your response, all of the nuance that Ascent captures, right? And I had a conversation with somebody in our field who goes, well, I mean, we have a yes-no program. I'm like, yeah, not the same, right? And that like we as a field need to get there. And we've said it on previous podcasts that like we as a field are not there yet, but it's great that we have people to guide us into the nuance of where we need to be and listening to them and saying like, okay, a lot of people like, 90% of our field need to just hear what Ascent is and, give some basics, but then like moving into that and showing all the different layers and facets that you can work on Ascent and Ascent as an operant. So yes, it is about a lot of like evaluating contingencies and mitigating and looking at the behavior of the clinician and not only just the learner, but it also is like the Ascent as an operant is something to be focused on. That's really big.
One of the things that has bothered me the most, I try not to let social media get under my skin too much, but just someone wrote, we already have consent, and that's all that matters. And when someone's not legally able to consent, Ascent is not really even a thing. It's just something we're inventing. And it just, I don't know, it just took me to a new level of frustration to read that because it's so not true. And It's not unique to behavior analysis. If you go to therapy and you don't want to be there and you are under 18 and you just sit there and you say not a word, what are they going to do about it?
Yeah.
I've got a friend right now whose child needs to have a blood draw, but they're scared of the blood draw. No one is tying them down and forcing them to have this blood draw. They're finding other ways to get the information while they work with the kid to maybe one day be okay with the blood draw. So I'm just fearful that if we have the parents' consent, then the child has to do whatever the therapist says. That's just dangerous. Have we not learned enough through a history of abuse to know that's not true? Carrie, you're about to eat your
I am, but I also know that I keep on talking and I'm not letting others talk. But let me just get this.
We're going to clear a path for Kelly in a moment.
Is that like, yes, so much of that. Like if consent was more inclusive, if our practices were more inclusive, like if that was at the forefront of our thinking and practice, then fine. But we need, one, it is something different. And two, we need to like identify it and make sure that it has like its own name because we are actively doing it. And yet we see in so many, like, yes, blood drawn, I totally like all of these examples. I'm like, lived it. One example that came up last week was, and Kristen and Tim heard this in one of our meetings, unfortunately, is that the principal of my, she hasn't listened to this, so I can talk about it. The principal of my student's school, who had the best intentions, and I love how creative she was going, was having parents record them pretending to be their kids, showing instances of disrespect. And her examples were like not wanting to eat vegetables, not putting their dishes in the sink, not wanting to do laundry and stuff like that. And as a behavior analyst and as a parent who's trying to include assent in everything that I do, there were red flags that showed up for me here. But one in particular, like we can talk about all the red flags, we don't need to, but one in particular was that I think other parents would not ask for consent from their or have their child assent to them recording those videos and having them being shown throughout the school based on some of the replies that I saw on that thread. And as I see just as a society, and we mentioned this before too, is that this is very much shown up in the world of people with disabilities, but it is very much active in our treatment of children, period, is that we are not asking for their assent or inclusion. And I can't imagine my children without them consenting to, one, me doing it, two, seeing the video, but imagine it just being spontaneously shown, me showing up as my worst self, or like as in not my best way, right? My parents mocking me for it, my whole school laughing around it. And then I'm now supposed to shift and be like, oh, well, now I will show you respect after feeling kind of humiliated. I just feel like, right, how many times just like society doesn't understand that we need to include assent and the preserving of dignity with, with children, because we have such an authoritative or authoritarian? Authoritative.
That's the ballot.
Yeah. We should have had one type of, I always would get this up on my Psych 101 test. But yes, I think that is the stance that we take when I think working with children, and as a side, even more so with people with disabilities.
In the context of within, the ability to withdraw consent at any point, withdraw assent at any point. If we look just at the parent perspective, I think Shannon was the one that just recently touched on this, saying that we already have consent, and that, those social media conversations of we have parental consent and all is well. Parents aren't often present at all times, right, to withdraw that consent. And assent is so important for the individual and clients that we're serving, the ability to make those moment by moment decisions and allow us as clinicians to evaluate what we're doing and what we need to change based upon that.
I
Yeah.
agree. And so I guess for the yes butters out there, what do you do? What do you do when you're in the middle of a treatment session and you are maybe you're the behavior technician and the child is withdrawing assent clearly by falling on the floor or whatever. And you feel this pressure that you're supposed to complete this trial or you're supposed to run this program. What advice do you have for behavior technicians who are experiencing that?
When I was in the clinical space, I always went back to just take a step back and put yourself in his or her shoes. What is happening right now? What is this demand? Is this really necessary in this moment? Reevaluate the entire situation. Then in my mind, I go back to Hamley's, happy, relaxed, and engaged, and televisability. Is this something that we are proud of? Are you proud of this? If this was being shown and broadcast at the clinic level in our organization, was this moment with this child significant? And go back to the rapport building and the relationship with that individual. I think those are all things that I like to talk about when I work with technicians working with children.
I also think too, we like building on what Nissa said, because I completely agree. Like, we're behavior analysts. What's the function? Like, let's look at this functionally. So like you said, I've gotten out our matching materials. I'm ready to go. You swipe them off the table and fall on the floor. So like, what's going on? Like, that's where we say, okay, we don't need to do matching. Let's figure out what's going on. Are you trying to escape work? Is the sound of the lights bothering you and I need to turn them down? Like, am I too close to you and you're sick of me being near you? Do I smell weird? You know what I mean? Like, there's lots of different things that can be affecting whether it's a child or an adult implementing this, and being able to like really functionally look at it, and then where we can modify, right, those features of either the instruction or the environment, I think is really important to kind of take that, like, take that perspective of like, is this, like you said, Nissa, is this something, a hill I need to die on, for lack of a better term, today, where like, I'm going to force you, I'm going to sit you up there and we're going to do this skill? Like, hopefully the answer is always no. Can I come back to it and like make these accommodations and have you work? Or is this something that we just need to pause and needs to be like further dissected by someone who has more skills than me?
I think it's tricky. I think that this is a huge training piece for supervising behavior analysts, because as a technician, if you're not comfortable in the moment, not getting that data point and not following that intervention plan, and the ability to take a step back is a skill that needs to be trained. And so I think supervisors ought to be really mindful of that in support of those that are implementing the plan.
Such a good point. Yeah, Kelly, Nissa, I think that the way that you guys frame that, and Kristen, especially with some of the really subtle details that might have an instance of behavior be incongruent with perhaps patterns of behavior that were observed over time, and that might have us feel a little bit sort of anxious to like not do something. But, if all behavior, and I've always kind of thought about it, all behavior is communicative, that there's a way that when you feel supported by those that are supervising you to take that step back, to not feel that pressure, to accomplish something that actually isn't really in service to the one that you're trying to serve. That's where I think we kind of look at those organizational changes, and we look at that supervisory behavior, and sort of finding our comfort in the idea that behavior is not, our science has never been built on the science of instances. We've always been, operants are not one thing, they are classes of things. And I think that our science actually has a really compassionate foundation. It hasn't always been acknowledged as such, and certainly there is a lot of examples that we have to be humble with in sort of reckoning with some of our past and some of the practices of our past. And I think that people that are out in front of this, certainly colleagues that I'm here with now that I learn from, and that also you guys have talked to before, leaders in our discipline that are really out in front of this, I think give me a lot of, one, comfort and humility, which I think is something that as professionals, those that are humble tend to do better, however you want to measure better. They seem to be doing a good job. And so I think that acknowledging that in service to behavior, this is really hard. It's really tough to do what you do. every day, day in and day out, especially at that technician level, and the variety of different motivating factors that are contributing to whatever's going on in that. Not only taking a step back from the person you're working with who may have demonstrated what might be considered a withdrawal of assent, but also kind of what are you operating against? Like if you feel that imposition to get right in there, you kind of wonder like, what has you want to do that? And bringing some self-evaluation to that as well, I think is a really helpful way to maybe making a different choice or selecting among other alternatives.
I always took it to, or not always. I don't want to make this sound like I was always there. No. I eventually, towards the latter part of my career, came to the thought of, well, you know what? If I've got a kid who throws the materials when it's color sorting time, if color sorting is my priority, I have got to rethink what our goals are and what's happening here. So, thank you, Kristen, for the example, because there's so many different things that could be happening. And Tim, as you say, is it a out of the ordinary response, or is this something that we get routinely? Is it something we get routinely with one behavior technician and not another, in another room on a certain day, whatever? But we are behavior analysts, and we can kind of take that sometimes as a thank you of maybe bringing it to my attention that perhaps the goal setting went awry. Just maybe. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks. Are there any closing thoughts as we wrap up this very fast half hour?
Just that I think we need to add to our hot topics list on things that RBTs can do within a session. I think our conversation here kind of talked a little bit about that, right? Like giving some sort of degree of freedom to the RBTs while they still are following the treatment protocol. I think that would be a good thing for us to elaborate on in the future.
Yeah. And I think the withdrawal of assent isn't an end all for every session, right? That can also look to be, how do I teach this self-advocacy skill in a more appropriate way, depending on what that consent withdrawal looked like in the moment, and what can we do to, improve in totality from there.
Great tips. Yeah. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Behavioral View.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View.